In a world where everyone's hiding something, the most dangerous person in the room is always the one you've trained yourself not to notice. The Jade Vault wasn't a restaurant. It was theater disguised as fine dining, where senators buried scandals under truffle risotto and CEOs negotiated hostile takeovers between courses of Kobe beef. Men like Kang Jae-sung came here to pretend the bodies buried under their empires had turned to dust long ago. He sat beneath crystal chandeliers that cast light like liquid gold, his Patek Philippe catching the glow, his jaw carved from stone and centuries of controlled rage. To the world scrolling past his name on business magazines, he was the investment genius who turned Seoul's underground into Manhattan real estate. To those who whispered his real name, the Raven, he was still the ghost of Gangnam. Still the man who'd walked out of Korea with blood under his nails and a fortune built on fear that never made the Forbes list. Tonight, he was trying to believe in civilization across white tablecloths and the murmured negotiations of the American dream. Juanita Rocker moved through the Jade Vault like smoke through glass. She didn't smile the way the other servers did, bright and desperate to be tipped and forgotten. Her face carried the kind of stillness that only comes from surviving things you're not supposed to talk about. Her hands, dark and steady as a surgeon's closing a wound, refilled champagne flutes and cleared plates with a precision that felt almost military. Jae-sung noticed. He told himself he shouldn't have, but there was something in the way she mapped the room. Not with a server's choreographed efficiency, but with a soldier's cold calculation. Her eyes tracked exits like other people memorized wine pairings. Her shoulders held a coiled readiness that didn't belong to someone serving appetizers. She moved through the space as if constantly measuring angles, distances, threats that shouldn't exist in a place like this. Except tonight, they did. At 10:08 p.m., 5 oak chairs crashed to the marble floor in perfect synchronization. By 10:09, the metallic shing of drawn blades cut through Vivaldi and small talk. The sanctuary of luxury became a confined killing floor, and the only thing standing between a mafia boss and a very public execution was a woman no one had bothered to truly see. But to understand how a waitress became the only reason Kang Jae-sung lived to see another sunrise, you need to know that Juanita Rocker wasn't born in the back rooms of New York restaurants. She was forged somewhere the government doesn't admit exists. In the kind of black site facilities where they send people who are too good at killing to ever live normal lives again, where your past gets erased and your future becomes a weapon. And Jae-sung, the Raven of Seoul, he'd spent 15 years believing money and fear made him untouchable. Tonight, 5 operatives from the Dragon's Claw triad, men with specialized training and a blood debt older than his American empire, were about to teach him the difference between feared and invincible. Welcome back, my beautiful souls and kindred spirits. Before we dive in, go ahead and subscribe, like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely warms my heart to see our little family of story lovers stretching across the world. Every click, every share, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable tales together. So find your quiet corner, get comfortable, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. The crystal didn't shatter. It exploded. One moment, the Jade Vault hummed with the low frequency of wealth and whispered deals. The next, the world became edges and violence wrapped in the metallic taste of adrenaline. Juanita's body reacted before her mind could interfere. The sharp bite of danger hit her senses familiar, almost nostalgic, and her center of gravity dropped low as chaos bloomed around her like a deadly, perfect flower. 5 men in tactical black, weapons drawn with the confidence of those who'd killed before and expected it to be easy, poured through the room with military precision. Every instinct Juanita had spent 3 years burying came screaming back to life. But these weren't amateurs storming a restaurant, and the man they'd come to kill wasn't cowering. Jae-sung moved like violence poured into a tailored suit. The first operative lunged, and Jae-sung's hand shot out faster than a man wearing cufflinks should move, catching the attacker's wrist and twisting with brutal efficiency. Bone cracked like a gunshot. The blade clattered across marble. Jae-sung drove his knee into the man's ribs, then his elbow into his throat. The operative went down hard, blood spreading across Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent. 2 more closed in from opposite sides, coordinated, professional. Jae-sung pivoted left, avoiding the first man's grab, and caught the second by the jaw, his fingers finding pressure points with the precision of someone who'd ended lives long before he learned to negotiate mergers. The man's eyes rolled back. Jae-sung released him, letting him drop like a puppet with cut strings, then spun into the first attacker with a kick that connected with devastating, practiced force. This wasn't a businessman defending himself. This was the Raven of Seoul, and he'd never stopped hunting. But the remaining 2 had flanked him perfectly, blades raised, patient and deadly, waiting for the kill shot. Juanita moved. She grabbed the serving tray from her hands and hurled it like a discus. It caught the left operative across the temple, staggering him backward. Then she was closing distance, fluid and fast, snatching a wine bottle from the nearest table. She didn't throw it. She smashed it against the bar's edge in one smooth motion and drove the jagged glass into the second man's weapon hand. He screamed. The blade fell. She swept his legs with a kick that belonged in a dojo, not a dining room, and he crashed into a table that splintered under his weight like kindling. The last man standing swung his weapon toward her. Jae-sung was already there, catching the blade mid-swing and twisting it upward as it discharged not a gun, but close enough. He drove his forehead into the man's face, a vicious headbutt that shattered cartilage, then ripped the weapon free and used it as a club, bringing it down on the operative's skull with brutal finality. Silence fell like a curtain dropping on a violent play. 5 bodies lay broken across the floor. Jae-sung stood among them, chest heaving, suit torn at the shoulder, a thin line of blood trickling from his hairline down his temple. He looked like a god of war dressed for a shareholder meeting, and Juanita stood frozen across from him, realizing with cold clarity that she hadn't saved him at all. He'd been managing just fine. Their eyes met across the wreckage, across overturned chairs and spilled wine that looked too much like blood. His gaze was dark, burning, something in it that made her breath catch in her throat. Not gratitude, not relief. Something hungrier, something far more dangerous. "You fight well," he said, voice rough with adrenaline and something else. "But you hesitated. That last man, you left him for me." Juanita opened her mouth, closed it. She had hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Her body had recognized him as something equal, not someone who needed saving, but someone who'd already saved himself. Jae-sung stepped over bodies like they were furniture, moving toward her with predatory focus. Blood stained his expensive cufflinks. His jaw was set. He looked magnificent and terrifying and utterly, dangerously alive. "Who are you?" Not a question. A demand. "Someone who should have stayed invisible," Juanita said quietly. Too late for that. He was close now. Close enough that she could smell sandalwood cologne mixed with gunpowder and violence. Close enough to see the way his pulse beat in his throat. "You move like a soldier, fight like a trained operative, but you serve drinks in my restaurant." "Your restaurant? I own this place. Own most of the block." His eyes never left hers. "Which means you work for me. And you just killed men in my establishment without permission." The air between them crackled with something electric and impossible to name. Juanita should run, should disappear into the New York night and never look back. But something held her in place, the way he looked at her, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve with his bare hands if necessary. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "The police are coming," Juanita said, voice steadier than she felt. "You need a story. I have one. Self-defense. 5 armed assailants attempted murder. Civilian casualties avoided thanks to alert staff." He tilted his head, studying her. "But you won't be here for it, will you? You'll vanish, because women like you don't talk to police." He knew. Somehow he knew. Juanita took a step back. Jae-sung matched it forward. "Stay," he said. Simple, commanding. The voice of a man who'd built an empire on being obeyed. "I don't take orders. Then take advice." His gaze intensified. "The dragon's claw sent these men. They know about you now, about what you can do. That makes you valuable, or a liability." He paused. "I'm offering protection. I don't need it. Everyone needs something." He raised his hand slowly, deliberately, and wiped a speck of blood from her cheekbone with his thumb. The touch was electric. Intimate, possessive, even ghosts. Juanita's breath stuttered. His hand lingered at her jaw, warm and solid and dangerous, and for one impossible moment, she wanted to lean into it, wanted to let someone else carry the weight she'd been dragging alone for 3 years. Then reason returned. She stepped back, breaking contact. "This was a mistake," she whispered. "No." Jae-sung's voice was certain. Final. This was fate. Juanita turned and ran, disappearing through the kitchen exit before he could stop her, before her treacherous body could betray her further. But she felt his gaze on her back the entire way. Hot, possessive, inevitable. Like a predator watching prey he'd already decided to claim. 48 hours after the Jade Vault became a crime scene, Jae-sung sat in his penthouse watching the city sprawl below like a circuit board of sin and ambition. The media had feasted on the story with their typical hunger for violence dressed in wealth. Billionaire investor survives brutal assassination attempt. 5 attackers dead. Heroic self-defense. His lawyers had crafted the narrative with surgical precision, turning carnage into a triumph of justice. But Jae-sung wasn't thinking about optics or public perception or the carefully orchestrated press conference his team had staged. He was thinking about her, Juanita Rocker. The name felt like a lie sitting on his tongue, artificial and constructed. Everything about her was carefully built fiction, and he'd confirmed that within 6 hours of her disappearance. No employment history before 2019. No paper trail leading backward into a past that should exist for every American citizen. No digital footprint beyond the ghost-thin identity of a woman who served drinks and collected tips and vanished into the margins of a city too busy to notice. She was smoke wearing a uniform, moving through his world like she had every right to be invisible. He'd spent 2 days tracking her, using resources that could find anyone, anywhere. The kind of network that made privacy a quaint illusion for everyone except, apparently, her. His head of security, Min Ho, had finally delivered results an hour ago, standing in this same penthouse with the exhausted satisfaction of a man who'd moved heaven and digital earth. The woman from the restaurant, Min Ho had said, setting a tablet on the glass desk between them. She quit via text 3 hours after the incident. No forwarding address, no explanation. But our people spotted her in Koreatown yesterday. Place called the Brass Lantern, dive bar on the edge of the district. She's tending bar there now. Jae-sung had smiled then. Cold and predatory. Still hiding in plain sight. Still serving drinks. Pouring liquor for strangers. Playing at invisibility as if she could erase what he'd witnessed. As if he could forget the way she'd moved through violence like it was choreography she'd been born knowing. As if their synchronized dance of death hadn't branded itself into his memory with the permanence of scar tissue. There's more, Min Ho had continued, swiping to a photograph. A tattoo, partially visible on the wrist of one of the dead operatives. A serpent coiled through a lotus flower, fangs bared. Dragon's claw triad. We've identified all 5 men. Ex-military, specialized in close-quarters wet work. They weren't sent to scare you, Jae-sung. They were sent to end you. And the client? We're still tracing the contract, but preliminary intelligence suggests Dragon's Claw leadership. There's been tension since you acquired the shipping routes through Busan. They're calling it territorial encroachment. Min Ho had paused, choosing his next words with care. This isn't going to be the last attempt. They've made it personal now. 5 men dead in a public space means they'll escalate to save face. Jae-sung had dismissed him with a gesture, his mind already elsewhere, already calculating. The triad was a problem that could be managed, eliminated, or negotiated with depending on the variables. But Juanita Rocker, the woman who fought like she'd been trained by ghosts and vanished like she'd never existed, she was the equation he couldn't solve. And Kang Jae-sung had built an empire by refusing to leave mysteries unresolved. Now, he stood and buttoned his suit jacket, the charcoal fabric settling against his shoulders with the weight of armor. The drive to Koreatown would take 30 minutes through evening traffic, 30 minutes to plan his approach, to decide whether he was pursuing a potential asset or chasing an obsession that had nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with the way her eyes had locked with his across blood-spattered marble. He drove himself, piloting the Mercedes through neon-lit streets that pulsed with life and desperation in equal measure. This was his kingdom. Not the boardrooms where men pretended violence was a metaphor, but these streets where power spoke in languages the city's elite pretended not to understand. Korean script glowed on storefronts, restaurants steamed with the scent of home cooking, and small shops sold dreams to immigrants who traded one struggle for another, believing American soil would make the weight easier to carry. The Brass Lantern occupied a corner lot, its flickering neon sign half dead, the L and the completely dark. Inside, the air smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke that had seeped into the walls over decades. A handful of regulars hunched over drinks at the bar, nursing wounds that had nothing to do with physical violence and everything to do with surviving in a city that ate the weak. And behind the bar, moving with that same hypnotic grace that had first caught his attention, was Juanita. She looked up when he entered, their eyes locking across the smoky, dim interior. And Jae-sung felt it again, that electric jolt of recognition, of 2 predators sizing each other up, deciding whether to fight or something far more dangerous. She didn't look surprised, just resigned, like she'd been expecting him, like she'd known the moment she'd revealed herself that invisibility was no longer an option. He crossed the room in measured strides and sat at the bar. The wood was scarred and sticky, decades of spilled drinks creating a topography of forgotten nights. She approached slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a caged animal that might or might not still be restrained. "Whiskey," he said, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the bar's other patrons. "The expensive kind you keep for people who actually matter." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, the first genuine expression he'd seen her wear. "We don't have expensive anything here, Raven." The use of his real name sent a thrill through him, dark and possessive. She knew. She'd known who he was from the beginning, which meant her presence at the Jade Vault had been deliberate, calculated. The mystery deepened. "Then give me whatever helps people forget," he said. She poured bottom-shelf bourbon into a glass that had seen better decades, slid it across the scarred wood. Her fingers brushed his when he took it, and the contact was brief but electric, sending heat racing up his arm. He saw her register it too, the slight widening of her dark eyes, the almost imperceptible catch in her breath. "You shouldn't be here," Juanita said quietly, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "They'll be watching you, following you. Coming here puts me in the crosshairs. You've been in the crosshairs since you decided to intervene." He took a sip of the bourbon. It was harsh, cheap, burned, going down in a way that expensive liquor never did. "The Dragon's Claw knows about you now. Knows what you can do. That makes you valuable or a liability, depending on how they choose to perceive the situation. I can disappear. You tried that already. I found you in 48 hours. He leaned forward, elbows on the bar, closing the distance between them. "How long do you think it'll take trained operatives with a vendetta and unlimited resources?" She was silent, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the edge of the bar with enough force that her knuckles went lighter beneath her brown skin. He could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the calculation, the risk assessment, the stubborn pride that wanted to refuse his help simply because accepting it meant admitting vulnerability. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "The truth. Who you are. Why you were at the Jade Vault that night. How a woman serving drinks moves like a trained killer." He paused, letting the questions hang in the smoke-filled air. "And then I want you to work for me. I don't work for people like you." "People like me?" His smile was cold, dangerous. "You don't even know what kind of person I am. I know enough. I know you've built an empire on fear and violence, and money laundered through legitimate businesses. I know the Raven of Soul has a body count that would make most serial killers look like amateurs. I know you're exactly the kind of man I spent 3 years trying to escape." Her voice was steady, but he heard the tremor underneath, the exhaustion of a woman who'd been running too long. "And yet you saved my life." That was instinct, muscle memory. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything. He stood, moving around the bar with deliberate intent, invading her space until they were separated by inches instead of the wooden barrier. She didn't back away, didn't flinch, just tilted her chin up to hold his gaze. Defiant, magnificent. "The Dragon's Claw came for me, and you revealed yourself to keep me alive. That makes you involved whether you want to be or not. They'll come for you now, to eliminate a witness, to tie up loose ends, to send a message about what happens to people who interfere in triad business. Then I'll handle it. Alone? Running from city to city, bar to bar, always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the knife you don't see coming?" He raised his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. Her skin was warm, soft, and he felt her shiver under the touch. "Or you could accept my protection, my resources, and help me find the person who broke my security and gave the Dragon's Claw access to the Jade Vault. You think it was an inside job? I know it was. That restaurant is a fortress. 5 men with specialized weapons don't just walk in without help." His hand slid from her cheek to the curve of her jaw, tilting her face toward his. "Someone in my organization betrayed me. Someone close enough to know my schedule, my security protocols, my blind spots. I need someone I can trust to help me find them." "You don't trust me." "No," he admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But I trust that you want to survive. And right now, our survival is linked. Help me find the traitor. Eliminate the triad threat. And then you can disappear again. I'll give you resources, new identity, enough money to vanish so completely that even I won't be able to find you." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the trap. He let her look, kept his expression open, honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be, because the truth was more complicated than a simple business transaction. The truth was that he'd been obsessed with her since she'd vanished into the night, that he dreamed about the way she'd moved through violence with deadly grace, that he wanted to unravel every secret she was hiding and claim them all for himself. "And what happens after we find your traitor?" she asked. "Then we're even. You saved my life. I'll give you yours back. Just like that? Just like that. Another lie. Because he knew with bone-deep certainty that he would never let her go. But she didn't need to know that yet. First, he needed her cooperation, her skills, her presence in his life for long enough that she'd stop seeing him as the enemy and start seeing him as something far more dangerous, a partner. Juanita exhaled slowly, and he watched the decision crystallize in her eyes. I don't work for you. We're partners, equals. I lead the investigation into your security breach, and you provide resources and protection. When it's done, we walk away clean. Agreed. He extended his hand, formal, businesslike, sealing the deal. She took it, her palm warm against his, her grip firm and strong. The handshake lasted longer than it should have, both of them holding on, feeling the current of something unspoken and inevitable running between them. My car's outside, he said. We start tonight. She nodded, untying her apron and tossing it onto the bar. As they walked toward the exit, side by side, Jae-sung felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just desire, though that was certainly present, burning in his veins like liquid fire, but something deeper, more complex. The sense that this woman, this ghost who fought like a demon and vanished like smoke, might be the only person in the world capable of understanding the darkness he carried, and that made her either his salvation or his destruction. He was looking forward to finding out which. The safe house existed in the kind of neighborhood where people learned not to ask questions. Tucked between a Korean bathhouse and a storage facility in Flushing, the building's exterior suggested abandonment, graffitied walls, boarded windows, the aesthetic of urban decay. But the moment Jae-sung's palm touched the biometric scanner hidden behind a loose brick, everything transformed. The steel door that looked rusted was military grade. The interior was pristine, minimalist, luxury wrapped in cutting-edge security. Juanita stepped inside and felt the weight of surveillance settling over her skin like a second layer of clothing. Cameras in the corners, motion sensors disguised as smoke detectors, bulletproof glass on windows that appeared normal from outside. This wasn't a safe house. It was a fortress designed to look like nothing worth noticing. You built this? She asked, her voice echoing in the stark white entrance hall. I own 17 properties like this across the city. Places to disappear when disappearing becomes necessary. Jae-sung moved past her, his presence filling the space with controlled energy. He shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it across a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent at the apartment she'd abandoned 3 cities ago. Beneath the jacket, his dress shirt clung to shoulders that spoke of discipline and violence kept leashed. The bedroom's upstairs, bathroom stocked. You'll find clothes in the closet, various sizes. Help yourself. Clothes? You'll be staying here. Safer than a hotel, more secure than any place you could rent on short notice. He moved to a console embedded in the wall, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. Screens materialized in the air, displaying security feeds, financial data, encrypted communications. We have work to do. Juanita should have argued, should have insisted on maintaining separation, but exhaustion was a weight pressing down on her bones. She'd been running for 3 years, sleeping light, always ready to move. The promise of safety, even temporary, was a temptation she couldn't quite resist. I need to see your security protocols, she said instead of arguing. Access logs, personnel files, financial records for anyone with clearance to the Jade Vault's upper floors. Already pulled them. He gestured to one of the floating screens. Everything's here. But first, I need to know what I'm working with. Your skill set, your background. Why a woman who moves like a trained operative was serving drinks in my restaurant? Does it matter? It matters if I'm trusting you with information that could destroy me. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. I'm opening my empire to you, Juanita. Or whatever your real name is. The least you can do is tell me who you are. The least you can do. As if truth were a small thing, easily given. As if her past weren't soaked in blood and government denial and the kind of operations that disappeared from official records before they ever existed. My real name is Juanita, she said slowly. That part's true. The rest rocker isn't my birth name. That came later, after I finished my contract with a program that doesn't officially exist. Domestic security operations. The kind where you're trained to infiltrate, extract, eliminate threats to national security without leaving evidence behind. Black Ops. Something like that. Except we operated on American soil, against American targets. Citizens the government decided were too dangerous to arrest, too connected to prosecute, too valuable to kill, obviously. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the climate-controlled temperature. I was recruited young, 17. Told I had aptitude for violence and a face that made people underestimate me. They trained me for 3 years, then deployed me for 5. By the time I turned 25, I had 17 confirmed kills and a psychological profile that suggested I was one operation away from a breakdown. Jae-sung listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his body utterly still. So I disappeared, Juanita continued. Faked my death during an operation in Miami, used contacts I'd made to build a new identity, decided to become invisible, to serve drinks and blend into the background and never use those skills again. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. That lasted 3 years before I ended up in your restaurant and everything I'd buried came crawling back. Why save me? His question was quiet, genuine curiosity without judgment. Because I'm tired of watching people die. Because for once I could use what they made me into for something other than murder. She met his eyes. Because you looked at me like you saw past the uniform, and I hadn't felt seen in a very long time. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. Jae-sung moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory, until he stood within touching distance. This close, she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, smell the sandalwood and something darker beneath it, feel the heat radiating from his body. I do see you, he said, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite desire but held similar edges. I saw you that night. Not the waitress. Not the ghost. You, the woman who fights like death itself, and then vanishes because she's terrified of being found. I'm not terrified. You're petrified. His hand rose slow enough that she could stop him, and cupped her jaw with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about the Raven of Soul. Because being seen means being vulnerable, and you've survived this long by never letting anyone close enough to hurt you. She should pull away, should reinforce the professional boundaries they'd theoretically established. But his touch was warm, solid, anchoring her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Her breath came shorter, her pulse racing beneath her skin. This is a mistake, she whispered. Probably. His thumb traced her lower lip, a feather-light touch that sent electricity racing down her spine. But I'm very good at turning mistakes into opportunities. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stood frozen in the space between decision and action. Then Juanita made a choice. She stepped back, breaking contact, creating distance because her body was screaming at her to do the opposite. If we're going to work together, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, we need boundaries. This whatever this is, it complicates things. Everything worth having is complicated. But he didn't pursue her, didn't push, just smiled with dark satisfaction, as if her retreat were a victory instead of rejection. Fine, professional boundaries, for now, but Juanita, understand something. He moved to the holographic screens, his back to her, his shoulders tight with controlled tension. I'm a patient man. I've built an empire by knowing when to wait and when to strike. And right now, waiting is the strategic choice. But when we find the traitor and eliminate the triad threat, those boundaries you're so desperate to maintain, they're going to disappear. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And God help her. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let the darkness she'd been carrying alone find an equal in his. Wanted to stop running long enough to feel what it might be like to be claimed by someone as dangerous as herself. Instead, she moved to the screens and began pulling up security logs. Show me your access records for the week before the attack. Anyone who entered the Jade Vault's restricted floors. Anyone who had knowledge of your schedule. Jae-sung joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and together they dove into the labyrinth of data. Hours passed, the night deepening outside bulletproof windows, as they traced digital footprints and analyzed patterns. Juanita worked with methodical precision, her mind slipping into the analytical mode she'd perfected during her operational years. Every keystroke, every file accessed, every anomaly became a thread she could follow. Here, she said finally, highlighting a series of transactions. Look at this pattern. Small, seemingly innocuous transfers, money moving through shell corporations into accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. But the timing, she pulled up a calendar overlay, corresponds with triad operations in the region. Drug shipments, weapons deals, territorial enforcement. Jae-sung leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, his presence overwhelming. Those accounts shouldn't exist in our system. Our financial records are encrypted, compartmentalized. Only 3 people have access to this level of detail. You and Minho. My head of security. He's been with me for 12 years. Jae-sung's jaw tightened. And Jin-woo, my financial advisor. Family friend from Seoul. I'd trust him with my life. One of them is betraying you. No. The denial was immediate, visceral. Minho saved my life in Busan. Jinwoo helped me build this empire from nothing. They're not just employees, they're brothers. Juanita turned to face him fully, her expression hard. Then one of your brothers is selling you to the Triad, because these transactions are too sophisticated, too deeply embedded in your legitimate operations, to be anyone outside your inner circle. She watched the realization break over him like a wave, the way his features shifted from denial to fury, to something colder, more dangerous. Betrayal had a particular kind of pain, she knew, especially when it came from family. We need to confirm which one, he said finally, his voice stripped of emotion. And then we need proof that will hold up if I decide to make this legal instead of permanent. And if you decide to make it permanent? His smile was a blade wrapped in darkness. Then I'll need your help making it look like an accident. They worked through the night, building a profile of the traitor through digital breadcrumbs and forensic accounting. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Jae-sung brought food from the fully stocked kitchen, Korean comfort food, stew and rice and banchan that reminded her of meals she'd eaten in safe houses across the world. They ate in silence, the companionship of exhausted soldiers rather than the awkwardness of strangers. Why did you really build this empire? She asked as they returned to the screens. It wasn't just money or power. Men like you, we don't do things for simple reasons. You're right. It wasn't about money. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I came to America with nothing but blood under my nails, and a name that meant something in Seoul's underworld. I was 22, angry, convinced I could rebuild here what I'd lost there. But I learned quickly that America doesn't care about your overseas reputation. Here, I was just another immigrant with an accent and a history I couldn't prove. So you proved it. I built an empire that couldn't be ignored. Turned nightclubs into money laundering operations, legitimate businesses into fronts for everything the city wants to pretend doesn't exist. And somewhere in the middle of building, I forgot why I started. The empire became the point, the violence became normal, and the man I'd been the one who believed in something beyond survival. He died somewhere between Seoul and Manhattan. Juanita understood that death, had experienced her own version when the government had molded her into a weapon and then discarded her when she'd begun asking questions about the people she was killing. We're quite a pair, she said softly. Two ghosts pretending to be human. Maybe that's why I can't stop thinking about you. He turned to her, and in the blue glow of the holographic screens, he looked like something carved from shadows and desire. Because you're the first person I've met who might understand what it's like to carry this weight. Understanding doesn't make it lighter. No, but it makes it less lonely. The confession settled between them, heavy and intimate, and Juanita realized they'd crossed some invisible line without meaning to. Professional boundaries were dissolving in the face of shared darkness, mutual recognition of what they'd both become. It's almost dawn, she said, though she made no move to leave. We should rest. Continue this later when we're fresher. Probably. But neither of them moved, both caught in the magnetic pull of proximity and exhaustion, and something far more dangerous than simple attraction. Finally, Jae-sung stepped back, breaking the spell. The bedroom upstairs is yours. I'll take the couch down here. We'll resume in the afternoon after we've both slept. Juanita nodded, grateful for the escape, and climbed the minimalist floating staircase to the second floor. The bedroom was exactly what she expected. Clean lines, expensive sheets, more luxury disguised as simplicity. She should have been too wired to sleep, her mind still racing with data and possibilities. But the moment her head hit the pillow, exhaustion dragged her under. She dreamed of blood and shadows and a man with a dragon tattooed across his back, watching her from across a room filled with corpses. 3 days into the investigation, the evidence became undeniable. Jinwoo, Jae-sung's financial advisor, the man who'd helped him build legitimate businesses from criminal foundations, who'd stood beside him through territorial wars and government audits, who was family in every way that mattered, was the viper hidden in silk. Juanita had confirmed it through painstaking reconstruction of digital breadcrumbs. Encrypted communications routed through the dark web, financial transfers timed precisely with Triad operations, and finally, the smoking gun. A recovered message from a Triad lieutenant that read, "Your Korean protection is a myth, Jae-sung. You will fall by your own hands." They sat in the safe house's main room, the evidence displayed across multiple screens, irrefutable and devastating. Jae-sung stared at the data with the expression of a man watching his world collapse in real time. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, hadn't moved, barely seemed to breathe. "I'm sorry," Juanita said quietly, "because what else could you say to a man confronting betrayal of this magnitude?" Don't be sorry. His voice was hollow, scraped raw. You were right. I was the one who refused to see it, who chose loyalty over logic. He stood abruptly, the movement sharp and violent, and drove his fist into the nearest wall. Drywall cracked. Blood bloomed across his knuckles. 12 years. 12 years I trusted him with everything. With my money, my secrets, my life. And he sold me to the people who want me dead. Jae-sung. Do you know what the worst part is? He turned to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her chest ache. It's that I understand why. Jin-woo lost his brother in the territorial war with the Triad 3 years ago, a casualty of my expansion into their territory. I told him it was necessary, that his brother's death bought us leverage. That sacrifice was the price of empire, and he smiled and nodded, and helped me consolidate power while he plotted my destruction. He made a choice, a wrong one. But that's on him, not you, is it? His laugh was bitter, broken. I built this empire on blood and fear. I made decisions that destroyed families, ended lives, created enemies who'll never forgive or forget. Jin-woo's betrayal is just the bill coming due for all the violence I pretended was justified. Juanita crossed the room and took his damaged hand in hers, her fingers gentle as they traced the split knuckles. You're not the monster you think you are. You don't know what I've done. I know exactly what you've done. I can see it in every careful decision, every moment of controlled violence, every time you choose strategy over impulse. She met his eyes, willing him to hear her. You're a killer, yes, but you're not a monster. Monsters don't feel guilt. They don't question their choices or ache over betrayal. They don't build safe houses to protect people who should be their enemies. Is that what you are? My enemy? I don't know what I am to you. The confession felt dangerous, too honest. But she was tired of pretending the connection between them was purely professional. But I know I've seen the worst of what you're capable of, and I'm still here. That should tell you something. He turned his hand in hers, linking their fingers, his grip almost desperate. Tell me about the worst thing you've done. The operation that broke you. It was an unfair ask, trading trauma like currency. But Juanita found herself answering anyway. Miami. 3 years ago. Target was a shipping magnate with ties to human trafficking. My orders were to infiltrate his organization, gather evidence, then eliminate him during a meeting with his distributors, make it look like a deal gone bad, leave no witnesses. But when I got there, I realized the distributors were just street-level dealers, kids mostly, desperate and stupid, and in over their heads. My handler told me the orders stood. Eliminate everyone, secure the operation, I argued. He threatened to pull my extraction, leave me burned in hostile territory unless I completed the mission. Jae-sung's jaw tightened. You did it. I killed the target and 2 of his actual lieutenants, but the kids I let them scatter. Fired into the walls, created chaos, gave them time to run, then I faked the scene to look like I'd followed orders. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My handler knew, called me soft, told me I was done after debriefing. That's when I realized I'd become something I didn't recognize, a weapon that questioned its purpose. So I disappeared before they could retire me permanently. You saved them, the kids. I don't know if I saved them or just delayed their destruction, but I couldn't kill them, couldn't cross that line and remain human. She squeezed his hand. That's the difference between us and actual monsters, Jae-sung. We still have lines we won't cross, still carry the weight of the lines we've already crossed. That makes us damaged, yes, dangerous, absolutely, but not monsters. He pulled her closer, and she let him, their bodies fitting together with the ease of puzzle pieces designed for each other. His forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her lips, and for a moment they existed in a bubble where the world outside didn't matter. I'm going to kill him, Jae-sung said quietly. Not a threat, a statement of fact. Jin-woo. When we find him, I'm going to make him answer for this betrayal. I know. Will you help me? I'll do whatever you need. Another dangerous confession, but she meant it. Somewhere between analyzing data and sharing trauma, she'd stopped seeing him as a client or a FIDE, temporary partner. He'd become something else entirely, something that terrified her more than any operation she'd ever run. What I need, he murmured, his lips almost brushing hers, is to stop thinking about betrayal and death and empire for just one moment. What I need is to feel something other than rage. Jae-sung, tell me to stop. His hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. Tell me this is unprofessional, that we're breaking the boundaries you insisted on, that this is a complication we can't afford. Tell me, and I'll stop. But Juanita couldn't form the words, couldn't summon the logic that would push him away, because she needed this too, needed to feel something warm and alive and human after 3 days of dissecting betrayal and planning violence, needed to touch something real instead of the ghosts they'd both become. So instead of refusing, she closed the final distance between them and kissed him. The kiss was nothing gentle. It was fury and desperation and 3 years of running colliding with 12 years of building empires on blood. His hands tightened on her body, one sliding up her spine to tangle in her hair, the other gripping her hip with enough force to bruise. She responded with equal intensity, her fingers digging into his shoulders, pulling him closer, deeper, trying to crawl inside his skin and share the darkness that was threatening to consume them both. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads pressed together, both trembling with the force of what they'd unleashed. "This changes things," she whispered against his mouth. "Everything's already changed." He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. "The moment you saved my life, Juanita, the moment I decided I wasn't letting you vanish, this was always inevitable." She knew he was right, had known it from that first locked gaze across blood-spattered marble. They were two broken people who'd found something almost like wholeness in each other's jagged edges. It wasn't healthy. Probably wasn't safe. Definitely wasn't smart. But it was real. And that was more than either of them had experienced in longer than they could remember. The safe house's bed was a sanctuary wrapped in expensive sheets, and the kind of darkness that made confession easier. They'd made love with the desperate intensity of two people who'd been alone too long, who'd carried too much weight, and finally found someone strong enough to share it. Now they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on skin, hearts gradually slowing to something approaching normal rhythm. Jae-sung traced patterns across Juanita's bare shoulder, his touch reverent in a way that contradicted everything she knew about the Raven of Soul. This close, in the aftermath of intimacy, he looked younger, almost vulnerable, the hard edges of his control softened by satisfaction and something deeper. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, "about what happens after we find Jin-woo, after we eliminate the triad threat." "Don't." Juanita pressed her finger to his lips, silencing him. "Don't make plans for a future that might not exist. Let's just have this. Right now, without thinking about tomorrow. You think we won't survive? I think we're both too damaged to build anything lasting." She shifted to face him fully, her dark eyes serious. "I think you'll eventually realize I'm a reminder of your worst moments, and I'll realize you. T was, continue, were too much like the life I was trying to escape. Or," he countered, his hand sliding to cup her jaw, "we'll realize we're the only people in the world who understand each other completely, the only ones who can look at our darkness and not flinch." Before she could respond, his phone shattered the intimacy with a harsh vibration against the nightstand. Jae-sung grabbed it, his expression shifting to business mode with practiced ease. "Min-ho," he said, answering. Then his entire body went rigid. "When? Are you certain?" A pause. "No, don't approach him. I'm coming in." He ended the call and was out of bed immediately, reaching for his clothes with military efficiency. Jin-woo's disappeared. Min-ho went to his apartment for a scheduled briefing and found it abandoned, but he left something behind. A message addressed to me. Juanita was already dressing, her body moving on autopilot. Could be a trap. Almost certainly is. He pulled on his shirt, his movements sharp with controlled fury. "Which is why you're coming with me. I need your eyes on this." They arrived at Jae-sung's headquarters, a legitimate investment firm occupying 3 floors of a Manhattan high-rise 20 minutes later. Min-ho met them in Jae-sung's private office, his expression grim. He was a compact man in his 40s, scarred and efficient, with the look of someone who'd seen violence and learned to speak its language fluently. "It was sealed with your private cipher," Min-ho said, handing Jae-sung a heavy envelope. "Security footage shows Jin-woo entering his apartment 2 days ago but never leaving. We think he used the maintenance tunnels to disappear." Jae-sung opened the envelope with careful precision. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Brooklyn and a message written in Korean. Juanita couldn't read the characters, but she saw the way Jae-sung's face drained of color. "What does it say?" she asked. "Come face the consequence of your choices, brother. The dragon awaits in the place where your empire was born. Come alone, or watch your city burn." Jae-sung's voice was hollow, mechanically reading a script that had already been written. "It's the warehouse where I processed my first shipment into American ports, where I built the foundation of everything I own. It's an ambush," Juanita said flatly. "He's luring you into triad territory with enough firepower to end you permanently. I know. But Jae-sung was already pulling up blueprints of the warehouse on his office computer, analyzing entry points and sightlines with the focus of a man planning war, which is why I'm bringing a small team. Elite operators. We go in prepared for the worst. No. Juanita moved between him and the screen, forcing him to look at her. You go in and you're playing into exactly what they want. You take a team and you start a war that'll spill into the streets and get civilians killed. There's a better way. I'm listening. She pulled up her own encrypted connection, bypassed his security with ease that made Minho tense, and brought up a completely different set of schematics. We don't go in like warriors. We go in like ghosts. I have contacts, people who owe me favors from my operational days. We can position tactical support in the shadows, invisible until needed. You walk in like they expect, arrogant and alone. But you won't be. That's suicide. It's strategy. She leaned across the desk, her voice intense. You want Jinwoo to confess? To give you the information you need about triad leadership structure before you end him? Then you need him confident. Thinking he's won. The moment you show up with obvious backup, he'll detonate whatever trap he's prepared and we'll get nothing. Minho looked between them, his expression skeptical. And who is this woman you're trusting with your life? Jae-sung? She appears at the restaurant, coincidentally skilled enough to save you. Now she's running operations from your private office? She's with me, Jae-sung said simply. That's all you need to know. With all due respect, that's not enough. Not when your life's on the line. Juanita understood the security chief's suspicion. In his position, she'd be asking the same questions. My name is Juanita Rocker. I'm former covert operations, domestic security. I've been off the grid for 3 years. Your boss and I have a mutual interest in seeing the Dragon's Claw eliminated and his traitor exposed. That's the extent of our relationship. Liar, her heart whispered. But her face remained impassive. Minho studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If Jae-sung trusts you, that's enough for me. But understand this if you're playing him. If this turns out to be a deeper deception, there's nowhere you can run that I won't find you. Noted. She turned back to Jae-sung. We have maybe 12 hours before Jinwoo decides you're not coming and triggers whatever backup plan he has. I need to make calls, coordinate positioning, ensure we have medical support standing by. You need to prepare yourself mentally for whatever he's going to say. I'm ready. No, you're not. She touched his arm, the gesture brief but laden with meaning. Jinwoo is going to say things designed to hurt you, to make you understand his betrayal was your fault, to plant doubt and guilt and make you hesitate when you need to act. You need to armor yourself against that now. Jae-sung's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Set it up. Whatever you need. You have my complete authorization. As Juanita moved to a secure terminal and began making encrypted calls, reaching out to ghosts from her operational past, she felt the weight of what they were about to do settling across her shoulders. This was the kind of operation that either resolved everything cleanly or destroyed everyone involved. There was no middle ground. And somewhere in the planning, in the careful coordination of invisible support and strategic positioning, she realized she'd made a choice, not just about helping Jae-sung eliminate his traitor, but about what came after. She'd spent 3 years running from the violence she'd been trained for, trying to become someone else. But watching Jae-sung face betrayal with the kind of controlled fury that reminded her of herself, she understood something fundamental. You couldn't run from what you were. You could only choose how to wield it. And maybe, just maybe, wielding it beside someone who understood the weight was better than carrying it alone. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, they finalized the plan. Jinwoo's trap would become their sting. The dragon's confidence would become their weapon. And whatever happened in that warehouse, whatever truths were exposed or blood was spilled, they would face it together. 2 predators who'd finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. The horizon waited, sharp-edged and unforgiving. They drove toward it anyway. The warehouse crouched at the edge of Brooklyn's industrial waterfront like a beast waiting to feed. Rust bled down corrugated metal walls, decades of salt air eating through paint and pretense. This was where Jae-sung's empire had been born 15 years ago, where containers filled with goods that would never appear on customs documents had first touched American soil, where he'd proven himself worthy of fear and respect in equal measure. Now it would serve as either his resurrection or his tomb. Juanita watched from a concealed position 300 yards away, night vision scope trained on the warehouse's main entrance. She'd positioned her contacts with surgical precision ex-military contractors who owed her favors they couldn't refuse, scattered across rooftops and access points like invisible guardians. FBI tactical support stood by 2 blocks away, ready to move on her signal. Everything was calibrated, controlled, as perfect as an operation this volatile could be. But watching Jae-sung walk toward that warehouse alone, his silhouette sharp against flickering streetlights, made something in her chest constrict with fear she hadn't felt in years. Alpha Team. Confirm position, she murmured into her comm. Northeast perimeter secure. No movement. Bravo Team. South entrance covered. Thermal shows 15 heat signatures inside, clustered center mass. 15. Jinwoo hadn't come alone. He'd brought the full weight of his triad alliance. Enough firepower to start a war. Juanita's jaw tightened as she adjusted her rifle's scope, tracking Jae-sung's steady approach. He'd refused to wear body armor, said it would signal fear, weakness, said he needed Jinwoo to believe he was walking into death with the arrogance of a man who'd never truly faced consequence. She'd wanted to argue, to force protection on him, but she understood the psychology. Predators smelled fear, and Jae-sung needed to appear as the apex predator, even surrounded by enemies. He reached the warehouse door and paused, one hand on the rusted handle. For just a moment, he looked back toward her hidden position, though he couldn't possibly see her through the darkness. The gesture felt like goodbye, like a man acknowledging he might not walk back out. Then he opened the door and disappeared inside. Juanita's world narrowed to the scope, to the thermal signatures moving inside that warehouse, to the sound of her own controlled breathing. Through her earpiece, she heard the faint audio feed from the wire Jae-sung wore, disguised as a button on his shirt. "Hello, brother." Jinwoo's voice, smooth and cold. "I wasn't certain you'd come. Where else would I be?" Jae-sung's tone carried casual menace. "You invited me to the place where everything began. It seemed appropriate to honor that invitation. Always so controlled, so perfectly composed. Even now, walking into a room full of men who want you dead, you can't help but perform superiority. It's not a performance when it's truth." Juanita heard movement. Footsteps on concrete, the subtle rustle of weapons being adjusted. Through the thermal scope, she watched the heat signatures shift, forming a loose circle around Jae-sung's position. They were boxing him in, testing whether he'd brought backup. "I want to understand," Jae-sung said, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more wounded. 12 years, Jinwoo. We built this empire together. I trusted you with everything. Why? Why? Jinwoo laughed, bitter and sharp. "You really don't know. Can't see past your own ambition long enough to understand what you took from me. Your brother. The territorial expansion 3 years ago. My brother. The only family I had left after Korea. You sent him into that conflict knowing it was a suicide mission, knowing the triad would retaliate with overwhelming force. And when he died, you called it acceptable losses, told me his sacrifice bought us leverage." The pain in Jinwoo's voice was raw, genuine. "You stood at his funeral and delivered a eulogy about honor and duty, then went back to your penthouse and forgot he ever existed. I didn't forget. You didn't care. That's worse." Metal scraped against concrete, a chair being dragged across the floor. "Sit down, Jae-sung. Let me explain how this is going to end." Juanita's finger hovered over her trigger, every muscle coiled tight. But Jae-sung's voice came through steady, controlled. "I'm comfortable standing. Sit down." The words carried lethal promise. "Or I detonate the charges I've placed throughout this neighborhood. 3 apartment buildings, a school, a hospital, all wired to explode if I don't send a cancellation code every 10 minutes. So sit and listen and understand that you're not leaving here alive." Through the scope, Juanita watched Jae-sung's heat signature lower as he sat. Her mind raced through contingencies, calculating blast radius, civilian casualties, the impossibility of finding and defusing explosives she had no intel on. Jinwoo had outplayed them, turned a tactical ambush into a hostage situation that neutralized her entire support network. "The dragon's claw is here," Jinwoo continued, his voice carrying satisfaction. "Their leadership has agreed to a partnership. Your territories, your operations, your empire, it all transfers to them. In exchange, I get what I actually want. Your destruction. Not just your death, Jae-sung. Your complete annihilation. Everyone will know you died begging, broken, betrayed by the person you trusted most. You're making a mistake." Jae-sung's voice remained calm, but Juanita heard the undercurrent of rage building beneath the surface. "The triad doesn't honor agreements. They'll take what you're offering and kill you the moment you're no longer useful. Perhaps, but at least I'll die knowing I destroyed the man who destroyed me." Juanita made a decision. She activated her secondary comm, the one connected directly to her FBI contact. "This is Rocker. We have a situation. Subject claims explosives planted in civilian locations. Need immediate area sweep and tactical assessment. Authorization code Delta 7 Romeo. Copy that. Deploying bomb squad to your coordinates. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. An eternity in operational time. Anything could happen in 12 minutes. Jinwoo could execute Jae-sung, detonate his charges, disappear into the night. She needed to accelerate the timeline, force the confrontation before Jinwoo was ready. Inside the warehouse, she heard Jae-sung speak again. Before you kill me, answer one question. Was any of it real? The friendship, the brotherhood, the years we spent building something from nothing? It was real. Jinwoo's voice cracked slightly. That's what makes this hurt so much. I loved you like family, Jae-sung, and you threw that love away for territory and power and an empire built on corpses. You made me choose between loyalty and justice. This is justice. This is revenge. There's a difference. Not to me. Juanita heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Her world crystallized to single-point focus. No more time for strategy, for careful planning, for hoping FBI bomb squads could work miracles. If she didn't act now, Jae-sung died, and everything they'd built between them, partnership, trust, the fragile beginning of something that felt like salvation would end in this rusted warehouse surrounded by enemies. She squeezed her comm. All teams, this is Rocker, green light, execute breach protocol, flashbangs on my mark. Copy, standing by. Through her scope, she watched thermal signatures shift as Jinwoo raised his weapon toward Jae-sung's seated form. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Windage and elevation calculated instinctively from thousands of hours of training. One shot. That's all she'd get before the situation dissolved into chaos. I'm sorry, brother, Jinwoo said, for what you made me become. Juanita exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The warehouse window exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Juanita's shot caught Jinwoo's weapon hand, the bullet punching through flesh and bone with precision that came from years of making impossible shots under worse conditions. His gun clattered across concrete as he screamed, clutching his mangled hand. Simultaneously, flashbangs detonated at every entrance, the coordinated breach she'd choreographed with her ghost team executing with mechanical perfection. The warehouse transformed into strobing, chaos, light and sound and smoke, and the sharp crack of tactical operators moving through confusion like it was their natural element. Jae-sung moved instantly, years of survival instinct overriding shock. He rolled left as return fire erupted from the Triad soldiers, using overturned machinery as cover. Through her scope, Juanita tracked targets, dropping 2 more with clinical efficiency before slinging her rifle and rappelling down from her perch. She hit the ground running, pulling her sidearm as she closed distance to the warehouse. Inside was controlled chaos. Her contracted operators moved with the fluid efficiency of professional soldiers, neutralizing Triad members with non-lethal takedowns, rubber bullets, tasers, pain compliance holds that incapacitated without killing. This wasn't a massacre. It was an arrest operation disguised as a firefight, because Juanita had lied to Jae-sung about one critical element of the plan. She reached Jinwoo, where he'd collapsed against a support beam, cradling his destroyed hand. Blood spread across concrete beneath him, not enough to be fatal but sufficient to keep him stationary. His eyes widened as she approached, recognition flickering through pain-induced haze. You, he gasped. You're with him? Not exactly. Juanita crouched, keeping her weapon trained on his center mass. FBI Organized Crime Division sends their regards. Jinwoo, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about 15 other charges I don't have time to enumerate. The warehouse's chaos was subsiding as her operators secured the Triad soldiers. Red and blue lights strobed through blown-out windows as FBI tactical units poured in, flooding the space with federal authority. This wasn't a gang war ending in blood. It was a calculated sting operation that she'd been orchestrating for 4 months, using the Jade Vault attack as the catalyst that finally gave her enough evidence to move. Where's Jae-sung? She demanded, scanning the warehouse. Here. His voice came from behind her, rough with adrenaline and something darker. Right here, wondering when you were going to mention you'd been working with federal agents this entire time. She turned slowly, reading the betrayal in his posture, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, ready for violence but uncertain who to direct it toward. It's not what you think. Really. Because I think you've been undercover this entire time. I think the Jade Vault wasn't coincidence. I think you've been using me to build a case against the Triad and everyone connected to them, which includes my organization. His voice was cold, clinical, the emotional vulnerability he'd shown her replaced by the calculating predator she'd first met. I think everything between us was part of your operation. No. She took a step toward him. He took one back. The operation is real. But what happened between us? That was... Save it. Jae-sung's expression was carved from ice. I don't need the apology. I need to know if I'm about to be arrested alongside Jin-woo and his triad partners. Juanita glanced at the FBI agents processing the crime scene, then back to Jae-sung. Walk with me. They moved to a quieter corner of the warehouse, far enough from federal ears to have something approaching privacy. Juanita could feel the weight of his anger, his sense of betrayal, radiating like heat. 4 months ago, I was approached by an FBI organized crime task force, she said quietly. They knew about my operational background, knew I'd gone dark, and they made me an offer. Help them dismantle the Dragon's Claw's American operations, provide them with irrefutable evidence of triad leadership involvement in murder and trafficking, and they'd guarantee me full immunity for anything in my past, a clean slate, a real life instead of running forever, and I was your way in. You were the target's target. The triad wanted you dead, which meant they'd eventually make a move significant enough to expose their entire structure. I got a job at the Jade Vault knowing it was one of your properties, knowing you frequented it, hoping an opportunity would present itself. She met his eyes. I didn't expect them to send 5 operatives. Didn't expect to actually have to save your life. And I definitely didn't expect... Don't. He cut her off, his voice sharp. Don't tell me you didn't expect to feel something. Don't try to convince me any of what happened between us was real when it was all part of your operation. It wasn't part of the operation. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Yes, I was working with the FBI. Yes, I used the Triad's obsession with destroying you to gather evidence. But what I felt, what we became to each other that was never part of the plan. That was me being stupid and reckless and falling for someone I had no business wanting. How convenient. The undercover agent falls for her mark. That's not a story, Juanita. That's a cliché. It's the truth. She released him, suddenly exhausted. And if you can't see that, if you honestly believe I would share what I shared with you, tell you things I've never told anyone, let you see the worst parts of who I am, all as part of some elaborate deception, then you don't know me at all. Jae-sung was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Around them, FBI agents were loading Jin-woo and the Triad soldiers into transport vehicles. The warehouse that had witnessed the birth of his empire was becoming the scene of its partial dismantling. What happens now? He finally asked. Jin-woo and the Triad leadership go to federal prison for the rest of their lives. Your organization. She paused, choosing words carefully. My case was never about you. The FBI wanted the Triad. They got the Triad. As far as federal law enforcement is concerned, you're a legitimate businessman who was the target of an assassination attempt, not a suspect. You protected me. I protected us. She stepped closer, close enough to see the war playing out behind his eyes. I could have built a case that implicated you. Lord knows there's enough evidence if I'd wanted to look. But I didn't want to. I wanted you safe, free, alive. I wanted us to have a chance at something that wasn't built on violence and running, by lying to me, by making impossible choices in an impossible situation. Her voice broke slightly. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Jae-sung. I know betrayal when I'm looking at it, even when the betrayal comes wrapped in good intentions. I'm just asking you to understand why. An FBI agent approached, tactical vest marked with official insignia. Miss Rocker, we need your statement. And Mr. Kang, we'll need yours as well for the official record. Juanita nodded. Give us 5 minutes. The agent retreated. In the space he left behind, silence stretched between them like a chasm too wide to cross. Finally, Jae-sung spoke, his voice stripped of emotion. When this is done, when you've given your statements and closed your case and collected your immunity, I don't want to see you again. The words hit like physical blows, but Juanita forced herself to remain standing, to meet his eyes without flinching. Understood. Everything we had, everything I thought we were building, it's over. You made your choice when you decided lying was acceptable. I'm making mine now. I know. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. For what it's worth, I believe you. I believe you fell for me despite the operation. I believe what we had was real. His smile was broken, sad, but I also believe that doesn't matter. Real or not, we were built on deception. And I've learned the hard way that foundations made of lies always crumble eventually. Then he walked away, toward FBI agents and official statements and a future that didn't include her. Juanita stood alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of her successful operation, and felt like she'd lost everything that actually mattered. The FBI debriefing took 6 hours. Juanita sat in a sterile interrogation room painted institutional beige, recounting every detail of the operation with clinical precision. Her handler, Special Agent Morrison, recorded everything with the satisfaction of someone who'd just closed a case that would define his career. "Outstanding work, Rocker," he said as they concluded. "The Triad leadership is in custody. We've seized enough assets to cripple their American operations for a decade, and we've got testimony from Jin Woo that'll put them away permanently. This is exactly what we hoped for when we brought you in. Glad I could help." Her voice was hollow, mechanical. Morrison studied her. "You all right? You did good here. Saved lives, ended a major criminal operation, kept a gang war from spilling into the streets. That's worth celebrating." "Sure." She stood, gathering the few personal items she'd brought. "My immunity paperwork? Being processed now. You'll have official documentation within 48 hours. Clean slate, just like we promised." He extended his hand. "You ever want to come back, work with us officially, you've got an open invitation." Juanita shook his hand without enthusiasm. "I'll keep that in mind." She left the FBI field office as dawn was breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that felt obscene compared to the darkness she carried inside. Her phone buzzed a text from one of her contracted operators confirming the bomb threat had been a bluff. Jin Woo had been bluffing about the explosives, using psychological warfare instead of actual ordnance. Smart, cruel, exactly the kind of move Jae-sung would have respected if it hadn't been aimed at his destruction. Jae-sung. Just thinking his name created an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her in that warehouse like she was a stranger wearing the face of someone he'd trusted. She'd saved his life, protected his empire, ensured he walked away from federal investigation without charges, and in doing so, she destroyed the fragile beginning of something that could have been salvation for them both. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but operational instinct made her pick up. "Juanita." His voice sent electricity down her spine. "We need to talk. I thought you never wanted to see me again." "I don't." A pause. "But there's something you need to know before you disappear. Meet me at the safe house in 1 hour. Come alone." He ended the call before she could respond. Juanita stood on the street corner, watching early morning commuters flow past like water around stone, and made a decision. One last meeting. One final conversation. Then she'd do what she'd always done best. Disappear so completely that even her memories would eventually fade to nothing. The safe house looked different in morning light, less fortress and more simply empty. She found Jae-sung in the main room, standing before the holographic screens they'd used to track Jin Woo's betrayal. He'd changed clothes, the blood-spattered shirt replaced by casual wear that made him look younger, less like the Raven of Soul and more like a man caught between identities. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "You said there was something I needed to know. Several things, actually." He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was profound. "First, Jin Woo's testimony includes information about my operations. Enough that even with your protection, I'm going to spend the next year under federal scrutiny. My empire as it existed is over. The FBI might not charge me, but they'll dismantle everything I built piece by piece until all that's left is the legitimate businesses and a reputation too damaged to rebuild. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's what I deserve." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and exhaustion. "Second thing, I was wrong. What I said in the warehouse about you lying, about us being built on deception. I was hurt and angry and lashing out at the only person who didn't deserve it." Juanita's breath caught. "Jae-sung, let me finish." His hand reached out, hesitated, then touched her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "You made impossible choices in an impossible situation. You protected me when you could have destroyed me. You risked your operation, your immunity, maybe your life, to keep me safe. That's not betrayal. That's love disguised as duty. I still lied to you, and I've built my entire life on lies. Who am I to judge?" His smile was sad. "And self-aware? We're both broken people who found something almost whole in each other. The fact that we got there through deception doesn't make it less real, just more complicated." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the man I was the Raven of Soul, the empire builder, the killer hiding behind legitimate business, he's dead. Jin Woo killed him when he proved that everything I'd built could be destroyed by someone I loved." He pulled her closer, until their foreheads touched, until she could feel his breath against her lips. "But maybe that death is freedom. Maybe it's a chance to become someone who doesn't need empire or fear or power to feel whole. Someone who could build a life with a woman who understands darkness because she carries her own. Jae-sung, I'm not. You're scared. I know. I'm terrified too. But we've survived everything else by being brave when being smart would have meant running. So be brave with me one more time. Come with me. Leave this city that knows us as ghosts and killers. Start somewhere new where we can be whoever we choose. Juanita wanted to say yes. Wanted to sink into the promise he was offering, the fantasy of redemption and second chances. But reality crashed against desire like waves against stone. I can't, she whispered. I've spent 3 years trying to become someone other than a weapon, and I just spent 4 months being exactly that weapon for a different master. I don't know who I am anymore, Jae-sung, and until I figure that out, I can't be what you need. You're exactly what I need. No, I'm what you want. There's a difference. She stepped back, breaking contact because staying close made rational thought impossible. You need time to grieve the empire you lost, to figure out who Jae-sung is without the Raven. And I need time to decide if I'm capable of being something other than the weapon they made me into. Maybe when we've done that work separately, independently, we can find each other again and see if what we feel survives reality. And if it doesn't, then at least we'll know we tried on our own terms instead of clinging to each other because we're both afraid of being alone. Jae-sung was silent, processing, calculating whether to push or accept her logic. Finally, he nodded. How long? I don't know. 6 months? A year? However long it takes for us to become people who can build something lasting, instead of 2 broken survivors holding each other together through sheer will. That's a long time. It's necessary. She allowed herself one last touch, fingers tracing his jaw, memorizing the angles of his face. You saved me when you saw me that night at the Jade Vault, saw me completely and didn't turn away. That's worth protecting. Worth waiting for. Worth becoming the best versions of ourselves so we don't destroy it with our damage. He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm in a gesture of farewell and promise combined. Where will you go? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can think without running. She smiled, fragile and genuine. What about you? Japan, maybe. My mother's family has property in Kyoto. Somewhere I can remember who I was before soul and violence and empire. His grip tightened. I'll find you when I'm ready. When I'm whole enough to deserve what you're offering. I'll be waiting. They stood together in the morning light streaming through bulletproof windows. 2 predators learning to be human. 2 weapons discovering they could choose a different purpose. Then Juanita pulled away, walked to the door, and forced herself to leave without looking back, because looking back would have shattered her resolve completely. 6 months later, Juanita stood on a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching waves crash against California coastline with hypnotic rhythm. She'd chosen Santa Barbara for her exile, far enough from New York to feel like escape, close enough to familiar territory that she didn't feel completely unmoored. She'd bought a small house with money from her FBI immunity agreement, something modest and hers, the first space she'd owned in over a decade. The work of becoming human again had been harder than any operation she'd run. Therapy with a specialist who understood operational trauma, long days of hiking in silence and learning to be alone without being lonely, reading books that had nothing to do with tactics or survival, cooking meals that weren't just fuel, building a life that wasn't defined by running or hiding or waiting for the next threat. It wasn't perfect. Some nights she still woke, gasping, caught in nightmares of blood and missions gone wrong. Some days the absence of purpose felt like drowning, but slowly, painfully, she was discovering a version of herself that existed separate from violence. A woman who could choose peace without feeling like a coward. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number containing only coordinates and a time. Tomorrow, sunset, a private airfield 30 miles north. She smiled, something warm and real unfurling in her chest. The airfield was small, private, the kind of place where people with resources and need for discretion conducted business away from official channels. Juanita arrived early, watching the sky shift through shades of amber and rose as the sun descended toward the horizon. A sleek private jet touched down precisely on schedule, and her heart kicked against her ribs with anticipation and fear combined. Jae-sung emerged from the aircraft, looking transformed. The ruthless edges of the Raven had softened into something more human, more accessible. He wore simple clothes, moved with easier grace, carried himself without the constant calculation of threat assessment. But when his eyes found hers across the tarmac, the intensity remained that fundamental recognition of kindred spirits that had drawn them together in blood and chaos. "Hi," he said as he reached her. The simplicity of the greeting almost absurd after 6 months of silence. "Hi yourself." She studied him, cataloging changes. You look different. I feel different. Lighter. Like I finally stopped carrying weight I was never meant to hold. He smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way it never had before. Japan was good. Quiet. Gave me time to remember what it felt like to be just a man instead of an empire. And I like being just a man. Especially if that man gets to build a life with a woman who understands why empire was so seductive in the first place. Juanita felt tears prick her eyes, sudden and unexpected. I've missed you. Every day. Even when I knew separation was necessary. I missed you so much it physically hurt. I know. I felt the same. He closed the distance between them, cupping her face with hands that had killed but now held only gentleness. But the missing made this moment possible. Made it so when I tell you I love you. I'm not saying it from a place of desperation or survival. I'm saying it because you're the only person I want to share my life with. Now that I've figured out what that life should be, I love you too. The words felt like freedom instead of surrender. Not the raven, not the ghost. You. The man who's brave enough to choose peace after a lifetime of war. He kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise, the kind of kiss that spoke to futures instead of stolen moments. When they broke apart, both breathless, he gestured to the jet. I have something to show you, a proposal, if you're interested. They boarded the aircraft, and Jae-sung pulled up holographic displays showing property listings. A vineyard in Sonoma Valley, acres of land, existing structures that could be renovated, potential for building something beautiful from the ground up. I want to make wine, he said, the confession almost shy. Something that requires patience and care, and waiting for things to grow instead of forcing immediate results through violence. Something honest. Juanita laughed, surprised and delighted. A mafia boss turned winemaker? A man building a life with the woman he loves. He took her hand. I want to do this with you. Build something together that isn't founded on empire or operations or anyone's agenda, but our own. I want to wake up next to you without wondering if today's the day someone comes to kill me. I want to argue about barrel aging and terroir instead of territories and rivals. I want boring and peaceful and real. That sounds perfect. She squeezed his fingers. Absolutely perfect. They flew north as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold that no longer felt ominous, just beautiful. Below, California stretched out like a promised land that had seen violence, but could host redemption just as easily. Land where two people who'd been weapons could learn to be gardeners instead. Do you think we'll ever completely escape what we were? Juanita asked quietly. No, Jae-sung said honestly. I think we'll always carry the scars. Always have skills we wish we'd never learned. Always understand darkness in ways most people can't. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being honest about our damage is better than pretending we're innocent. Two predators who chose to stop hunting. Two people who finally found home in each other. The jet soared over vineyard country, chasing the horizon toward a future they'd build together. Not perfect, not innocent, but theirs, chosen deliberately instead of forced by circumstance. They'd survived empire and betrayal and operations that should have destroyed them. They'd learned to be honest about their darkness, and brave enough to seek light anyway. And maybe, in a world that demanded you be either weapon or victim, choosing to be human was the most radical act of all. Juanita leaned her head against Jae-sung's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her with possession that felt like safety instead of control. Outside the window, the horizon stretched infinite and waiting. They were flying toward it together, finally running toward something instead of away. That had to count for everything. So tell me, beautiful souls, what did you think? Did this story of broken people finding wholeness in each other's darkness touch something deep inside you? Did you feel the weight of their choices, the heat of their attraction, the impossible beauty of two predators choosing peace? Drop a comment and let me know which moment made your heart race. Was it the restaurant massacre? The betrayal? That first kiss in the safe house? Or maybe it was the ending, watching them fly toward redemption together. I want to hear from you because your thoughts, your feelings, your connection to these characters, that's what makes storytelling magic. And if this story left you hungry for more dark romance, more dangerous men, and the fierce women who match them, hit that subscribe button, smash that like, share this with someone who understands that the best love stories aren't about perfection. They're about two damaged people brave enough to build something real from the wreckage. Because we've got more stories waiting in the shadows, more tales of forbidden desire and dangerous devotion, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Until next time, my kindred spirits, remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is choose to be loved exactly as you are, darkness and all. Stay beautiful. Stay brave, and I'll see you in the next story.